Welcome to episode 227 of the Scarlet Faithful podcast. I'm Aaron Brightman, coming to you on Tuesday, November 28th, and wanted to discuss Rutgers football. It really is a very fascinating month ahead for Greg Schiano and the program, and just wanted to kind of touch on a lot of questions, a lot of uncertainty, and also I think just some of the expectations in terms of how the season went. But really focusing on what does the next year plus look like? Because right now, as they said, stability is a hard thing to achieve. I've seen a lot of referrals to, and I know Schiano's referred to it in terms of, stacking classes and having enough of his own classes built into the roster to be able to have the depth and talent they need. Right. And there's no question that Rutgers is improved with depth and talent, but they're also not where they need to be to make a sizable step forward in the Big Ten. I think in a way, I know people look at year 4 and say they should be farther ahead or are disappointed with how the last 4 games went. And there's no doubt losing the last 4 games, even though the schedule was extremely hard, even with the way they lost some of those games, it was disappointing. And I do think that depth is part of it, but also it's also overall a lack of key talent in certain positions, right? In terms of the skill positions on offense. Defensively, I thought depth-wise, I got worn down. I don't think the defensive line developed as well as they had hoped. We saw linebacker depth, once Jennings went down, and then Jennings went down on Saturday. He was playing questionable going into the game, didn't finish the game. That hurt them. Teray, I think, has done really well. He's been one of their best players. But they lost. It's not that he wasn't good in one of those 2 spots, but they lost versatility as a defense. They lost some unpredictability. They were able to move him around more when you had Jennings and Powell. So there was that. The secondary started to get banged up the last few weeks of the season. All of this is to say that everyone hopes that this season now you get bowl eligibility, first bowl eligibility in 9 years. But at the same time, going into a bowl game now is so different in college football because the transfer portal is going to open up on the 4th. And now the offseason and the postseason merge together. And that's very unique. And this is the first time Rutgers is going to have to deal with that. This is the first time Schiano is going to have to deal with that as a head coach because it really wasn't like that, in his first tenure. So I'm really fascinated to see how they're going to handle this next month. In terms of roster building, roster preservation, the bowl game, which, we'll find out on Sunday where they're going to go. Obviously, most projections have them going to the Pinstripe Bowl. That'll be an ACC opponent. I know some people want to see Syracuse, but they played in the Pinstripe Bowl last year, so by rule they can't go. I guess, rules are made to be broken. It's college football, NCAA, who knows? But that probably puts, Georgia Tech or Boston College is the most likely. We'll see. We'll see where they go. But then it's a matter of, is everyone going to play in the bowl game? I know Max Melton made some comments that make people wonder if he is going to play. He's been high on, has been a projected draft pick, for a while now. And there was some discussion as to whether, he would come back going into this year. So will he come back? Will he play in the bowl game? Kyle Monungai, same thing. I tweeted after the game on Saturday, if I don't have any insight on his situation, and I know, other players, Christian Izzian had tweeted that, he essentially was going to go, but as a running back, your shelf life is so much less or shorter shelf life, career lifespan in the NFL than a lot of positions. So he's not going to get any younger by staying another year. He's the Big Ten rushing title holder, rushing leader, rushing champion, and it just seems like it probably makes the most sense for him to go into the NFL draft. Whether he plays or not, the bowl game is another situation. And, there's a lot of time still, and if you decide you're going to go pro, there's a lot of people involved in that decision. There's agents, there's, all kinds of people that go into that decision. So one of my points is that this is obviously, I think winning the bowl game would be huge. Having a winning season for the first time in 9 years, and for Schiano to have that in his pocket, in terms of demonstrating that he was able to do that in year 4. I think it's important. I think it's an important part of the narrative. I think it's important for recruiting. Right now, the 24 class, is solid, ranked in 24/7 composite rankings, 11th in the Big Ten. That includes the 4 new Big Ten teams coming, so out of 18. But they are 34th nationally. So I think that also shows, 11th in the conference, right? Probably won't get people excited, but 34th nationally. So the competition is just brutal. So you have signing day, a few days before Christmas. You have preparation for the bowl game. You have who's going to play in the bowl game in terms of declaring for the NFL draft. You can obviously declare for the NFL draft after the bowl game, but some decisions may be made beforehand. You have the transfer portal, players potentially leaving before bowl preparation, before the bowl game, and then the flip side of that is keeping your roster together, but also how is Rutgers going to approach the portal in terms of adding to their roster, and you're doing all of that while preparing for a bowl game. So in a lot of ways, going to a bowl game, especially when you're a 6-win team, it makes things harder. You want to go to a bowl game. You want to have a winning season. Those things were, all on the table for Rutgers, and that's huge in year 4 for Schiano. But at the same time, this is a more complicated next month for him in the program because of that. Obviously, Gavin Wimsatt, quarterback discussion, what's going to happen? The Maryland game is really disappointing. I know that people have, think that I'm this staunch defender. I was pretty vocal before the season that I thought Rutgers should bring in a transfer portal candidate for competition, and they didn't do that. Will they do that again? I don't think it's a given. I don't. People have mentioned if Evan Simon leaves, they have to replace him. Well, they had 3 quarterbacks this season. If he does leave, and that, he very well could stay, but AJ Cerise coming in, who I think has a really bright future, he would be that 3rd quarterback, assuming Ajani Shepherd stays. Do they want 4 quarterbacks? There's a lot of questions there, and I also think the whole idea of, I don't think you can give up on Wimsatt. I don't think you can also 100% count on him either, right? I mean, there's a lot of steps he has to take forward in the offseason. This next month is going to be big for him. How's he going to look in the bowl game? I don't think it makes any sense to not go with him for the bowl game. But then I think it's completely fair in the offseason that everyone needs to be evaluated in the offseason. Everyone. No one is untouchable. And that goes for the coaching staff too. And that's not really a controversial statement. Everything needs to be reevaluated in the offseason. That includes quarterback. So how are they going to handle that situation? If you want someone in the portal, are you going to wait till after the bowl game? Because you might be missing out on some guys that you could bring in. And I was, NIL is in a whole nother wild card in this, right? And the idea that you need a ton of money to bring in a transfer quarterback, that's not necessarily true. Obviously, the top ones you do. But there's a lot of quarterbacks that are going to be out there, but you could do back channeling, you could do, conversations, but if you wait until after the bowl game, and the pinstripe, I believe, is the 27th or 28th, that's going to be an interesting situation. Who's still available? So, a team like Illinois, right, that's not going to a bowl game, in a way, at 5-7, they kind of have an advantage right now because they can make wholesale changes and go after, be very aggressive in the portal right now. I'm not saying Rutgers shouldn't be, but there's an added complexity to it by doing it now with your team, right? You're trying to win, you're trying to finish a winning season, and at the same time, you have to look towards the future too, and what the portal offers, and who's available, and who makes sense, and you have guys that you need to win that game that you might also, need to replace because they're going to leave either for the NFL draft early, or they might go in the portal. So, listen, Greg Schiano is this is a fascinating month for him in his tenure. Transitioning from year 4 to year 5. How is he going to handle this next month? Plus, obviously, the offseason is critical, but this month specifically is really, really critical. And that doesn't even talk about coaches, right? In terms of the coaching staff changes. I think that they'll keep a lot of the staff together. I think they should. Defensively, though, they're going to have some guys that are wanted by other programs, which is a good problem to have. Offensively, I mean, I think Kirk Shiraka has Pat Flaherty, Dave Brock. I hope they all return. You need that continuity. I think Ulrich is definitely going to return. So, Jameer Shaw, all those guys, how are they going to handle that situation? I think, obviously no changes are going to happen before the bowl game unless a coach decides to leave, which, would be a tough spot. And I don't think, it's not a good precedent for a coach or not a good decision for a coach just in terms of, keeping bridges together. So I think the staff's definitely going to be together. It's a matter of how are they going to look for next season. I think there's a lot of positives in keeping the staff together. But again, there's going to be coaches that are going to be wanted by other programs. There's also the Marquise Watson question. Will he return? He's had health issues all year. There's a lot of questions there. You have to close out signing day, right? I think they're in a good position to do so. But you don't want to backslide in any way. I don't, I'm going to have some recruiting guys on soon. Potentially could have a pickup here and there, but it's really now it's keeping the class together, but at the same time, having a strong read on the transfer portal and keeping your own guys together. NIL goes into that. Knights of the Raritan has been pretty active lately. And, if you contribute, that's a great thing. Schiano's talked about it a lot. NIL's a reality, and with NIL and portal combined, I mean, there is no, you can't take anything for granted. One thing I wanted to talk about too was the Big Ten came out with their defensive awards today. Rutgers had 7 defensive guys all get honorable mentions in terms of whether it's media or coaches. Nobody was named to the third team other than Jay Patel, place kicker, who has had a great year. And we'll talk about him another time. But defensively, Maya Nahanatu was selected by the media, along with Flip Dixon, Deion Jennings, Aaron Lewis, Robert Longerbeam, Max Melton, and Mo Teray. And for the coaches, Lewis, Melton, and Teray were named as well. So, just looking at Pro Football Focus in terms of advanced analytics, player grades, Flip Dixon was 19th in the Big Ten of all defensive players. So I thought he, and Teray was 25th. And that kind of, I think that passes the eye test too, because those were probably the 2 most consistent, best defensive players on the team this year. And they were both top 25. So they should have, when I saw that they all got honorable mention, I thought they should have been higher. Third team, possibly second team. Dixon graded out if you do pure grades, and I know grades aren't everything, but that's a second team grade. in terms of average, but position-wise, I'd have to go back and look. But I would say, 19th overall, you would think be a third-team guy, worst case. Lewis was 31, Jennings was 37, Shaquan Loyal 39, Longerbeam 41, Melton 52. Igbinosun was 69, and no one else was in the top 100. So I'm saying that in a way that I think some of the guys should have finished better, but at the same time, as a defense, I think that the coaching staff did an amazing job. And overall, in terms of defensive grades, they finished sixth in the Big Ten, which, with not having any true stars, right? You're not having any top 15 guys in player grades. Nobody finished on a team in the Big Ten. They were all honorable mentions. So I think you have to hats off to Joe Harris-Simiak. Obviously, Schiano has a hand in the defense, but the entire defensive staff, I think they did a great job, and I think it's an argument for keeping them all together once again. Then offensively, they'll announce the offensive awards tomorrow. But one thing I thought was really interesting as a huge question mark for the offense is Kyle Monangai, as we know. Will he return? I think there's a fair reason to believe that he won't. He graded out as the most elusive runner in the Big Ten. And I think that's really telling. And elusiveness is graded by, breaking tackles, yards after contact. The offensive line was good at times. They struggled at times. Not only do you potentially have to replace Monangai, right, who is a unique runner, but it was his elusiveness that made him very successful. I think from a system perspective, in terms of Shiraka, he fits the bill. I thought he was most similar of any Rutgers running back to Mohamed Ibrahim, who had all that success at Minnesota. So there's a style you need, right? And I know that Sam Brown, I think there's a question of another year of recovery. Will he kind of get a little bit more pep in his step? Is it a system thing? Is he not ideal? He's different, obviously, than Monangai. He's more of a smash mouth, I formation type of runner. Aaron Young potentially could return. And he graded high on the elusive rating too, but he didn't get a lot of action. So it'll be interesting to see if he returns. Obviously, it was just Sean Benjamin as well. And just in terms of the recruiting class, with who they have coming in, in terms of potentially making an impact, you don't have any top running backs other than Ed Guerrero out of Florida. And he's, listen, he could step in. You never know. But he's not a highly rated running back. I think it's hard to just expect that a freshman runner is going to step in and have a major impact. So there's a lot of needs if Monangai does leave. In addition to figuring out quarterback, figuring out running back, you have to upgrade your offensive line, whether that's development, whether that's keeping guys. Is Holland Pierce going to stay? If Holland Pierce leaves, he's had a very good year. He very well could go into the draft. He does have 1 year left. Tight end, they have to upgrade, right? They need help. Wide receivers, they're going to have to upgrade. There's a lot of work that has to go into the offense this offseason, a lot. And then you have to keep the defense together. And then if you have defensive guys leave, then you have to, some of those guys that are in your pipeline have to develop. So I'm not saying this to be an alarmist. I'm just saying that, I understand the frustration of not taking the step forward, another step forward this season. At the same time, they did take a step forward. But this whole, idea that it's a linear trajectory, that things are just going to keep going up. There's a lot of work just to keep things at this level, let alone take another step. So winning the bowl game's huge. Who you're going to have there remains to be seen. We don't even know who they're going to play, obviously, and if it's the Pinstripe Bowl, we think it is. But keeping the roster together for the bowl game, having that extra 15 practices for development time is huge, but it's so much more than that now. And it's also having an eye on the future and being active in the portal. And how do you balance that? it's fascinating to me. And, I'll have more on that as the weeks go by leading up to the bowl game. And I'll have David Anderson on later this week too to discuss some of this. But it's a lot going on, and then there's the big question of, is Greg Schiano going to get the extension? He has 4 years left on his contract. He's, at the bottom in terms of salaries in the Big Ten at $4 million. You need to have stability there, right? So that's a question for Pat Hobbs. I know he was on the Night Report podcast last week with Richie Schneiderate and Mike Broadbent. It was a great interview by them. Credit to them. And Hobbs kind of gave a non-answer, but alluded to the fact that they're going to be doing something. But that all has to happen timing-wise too. So there's just so much in terms of has to be done this offseason while you're trying to wrap up a winning season this year. So a bowl win would obviously be important for a positive narrative going the offseason. A 5-game losing streak would not be. It would take some of the shine off, I think, the progress made. But this program is definitely, it's in a I don't want to say a crossroads, but it's in a very interesting dilemma in terms of being able to take the next step, keeping things together, right? Not taking a step back next season, but also taking a step forward and just solidifying the future. How they're going to handle the portal, what the NIL situation is. We don't know. We don't know, but I don't think that we know that the NIL situation isn't ideal, right? What's ideal? Top 20 in the country? We know it's not that. That also doesn't mean that they're not going to be able to build and add quality pieces in the portal. You have to keep quality guys from leaving. They did a really good job of that last year. Can they do it again? Who's going to enter the draft? Who's not? Who's going to play in the bowl game? Who's not? So I know this is a lot of questions, but it's just I feel like not everybody is looking at that. People are disappointed about how the season ended. They achieved their ultimate goal. Now you can achieve even more with a winning season, but at the same time, you're dealing with all this extra stuff now. So I think how they handle this next month is going to be hugely impactful on the future. You need to close out that signing class. You need to retain your best guys in terms of not letting them escape in the portal. You got to bring in quality guys. And yes, they're not going to necessarily fill out their portal needs in the next month, but you have to have a strategy. You have to have a game plan, and they have a very good staffers for that. But the timing of all this and threading that needle is going to be really key in how they position themselves for next season. It's not just about everyone wants to focus on the quarterback, and yes, Gavin Wimsatt has to get better. And I think they, like I said before the season, they should bring in a quarterback through the portal. I don't think the whole freshman idea of just, thinking AJ Cerise is going to be a savior is fair. And I think ideally you want to be able to pace him, and develop. But we'll see. There's a lot of question marks all over the place. So it's going to be a fascinating month ahead. It's kind of, I guess you'd call it a preview. And I'm going to have a lot of guests on to discuss it, a lot of these different facets and what they think about it, because I think that, it's a crucial time. It's a fascinating time. College football, like I said, the offseason and the postseason are completely meshed together, especially when you're not competing for a national title. And most teams going to a bowl game are not. So plenty more to talk about and discuss. I hope this maybe opens some eyes or just, generate some discussion just in terms of all that's at stake right now. And it's not so simple. So plenty more to ahead here at the Scarlet Faithful Podcast. Thanks so much for listening once again. And I'll talk to you.